This set of notes covers one of the most important documents in the history of our country, the Declaration of Independence. So in a previous set of notes, we discussed how, as things got really bad in Boston, the other colonies met together at the First Continental Congress. And they decided to do some things like boycott British goods, write to the king and tell him why they were upset. And they also decided to meet again if things didn't get better. Well, fighting breaks out at Lexington and Concord, the first battles of the Revolution, and so things clearly were not getting better. So these leaders come together again at the Second Continental Congress, and they take some more steps. One thing they did was they created a new Continental Army, and they picked a Virginian by the name of George Washington, who already had some military experience fighting on the side of the British in the French and Indian War, to lead the army. And they also took up the question of whether or not the colonies should declare independence from Great Britain. Right? At this point, 1775, nobody could yet say which way we would go. So you had some people that wanted to, some people that didn't. And so these leaders are going to argue and debate this question. What they decide to do before declaring independence is try the king one more time. And they send the king something called the Olive Branch Petition. And here's a picture of part of what that actually looked like. And you can see right at the top there, it's addressed to the king, King George III. So the colonists send him this petition. And what it does is it offers a peaceful solution to the problem. And they call it the Olive Branch Petition because an olive branch is a symbol for peace. So they're saying, look, King George, we don't want to break away. We don't want a war. Can you help us? Can you help solve this problem peacefully? And King George refuses. He effectively balls up the Olive Branch Petition because he's so angry at the colonists. He feels like they're being children, right? Who are just acting up, and he's mad that they are defying his power. So I think a lot of historians would say when the king turns away the Olive Branch Petition, it sort of sets us on the path to revolution. Now we're talking about the Declaration of Independence, and so an important person that we need to talk about is this guy here, an English philosopher by the name of John Locke. Because as the colonies start saying, you know what, we're going to need to declare independence, they're going to use some of John Locke's ideas to help them write it. So as I said, he was a thinker, an English philosopher. One of his important ideas was that people have natural rights to life, liberty, and property. These are not things you have to apply for. They're not things you have to earn. He argues that everybody has these rights. He also argues that there's a social contract between the government and the people. Right? He's not talking about a literal contract that's signed on paper. He means an unwritten agreement between the government and the people. And it goes like this. People will obey the government as long as the government protects the people's rights. That's the agreement. Both sides agree to it. But John Locke said if the government doesn't do that, if the government fails to protect the rights of the citizen, then the people can overthrow the government. And so you can probably start to think about how these ideas impacted people here in America. So what about the people here in America? What were they saying on both sides? Well, on one side of the argument, you had the people who wanted to break away, and these were called patriots. So let's look at some of the arguments that they made. They said Britain has been a bad parent country. They're not taking care of the colonies. In fact, the king and parliament are taking away the colonists' freedom. they argued that if the colonies broke away, we could trade with anyone we wanted to. We don't need to follow the navigation acts anymore. We could trade with Europe, we could trade with Asia, we could trade with we could trade with anyone we wanted to. We don't have to follow England's rules. A really big argument was that we are sick and tired of Britain taxing us when we don't even have anyone in Parliament representing us, right? They would say no taxation without representation. And the Patriots pointed out, war has already started. The battles of Lexington and Concord have already taken place. So we need to go ahead and break away from England. Now, about 40% or so of the country were patriots. Another 40%, so roughly the same amount of people, were against breaking away. And these were called loyalists. They made some different arguments. They said things like, well, you know what? We get a lot of benefits from being connected with Great Britain, right? They can protect us. They give us a lot of business through trading. Britain has the strongest army and the strongest navy in the world, right? They can protect us. They can keep us safe. They can protect our ships and our businesses. They would argue that creating a brand new country is going to be really, really hard. Starting from scratch and building a whole new government is going to be really difficult to do. So we should stick with England because there's no guarantee that by breaking away, things are going to get better. In fact, they might make things worse than they already are. So these arguments are going on all over the country, right? Families are having these arguments. Friends are having these arguments. They're happening in homes and in town squares and in state governments and in pubs and taverns. Lots of people for breaking away, lots of people against. The remaining 20% were kind of in the middle, and those were called moderates. And as you can imagine, they're in between. They see the points being made on both sides. So a moderate might say something like, well, I disagree with how Britain is ruling us, but I'm not sure that I want to break away yet. Which brings us to this guy. This is a man named Thomas Paine, and he wrote a very important book. Really not even a book, it was a pamphlet, like a small, short booklet called Common Sense. And he writes this to try to convince those moderates to choose a side. So first off, what was it? As I said, it's a very widely read pamphlet written by Thomas Paine in 1776. And Paine was a patriot. He wanted to break away. And his argument was, it is just common sense that the colonies should split with Britain. He also wrote in there that we should get rid of the monarchy totally and establish a representative democracy where the people are the source of power and where the people get to choose who their leaders are. So a lot of moderates read this and were won over and became patriots because of Thomas Paine. Which brings us to this guy, Richard Henry Lee. And he was from Virginia, and he was a patriot. And as more and more people joined the patriot side, he proposed to the Second Continental Congress that we should declare our independence from Britain. Congress put together a committee of several people that included Thomas Jefferson to write up a declaration. They voted on it on July 2nd, and it was officially approved on July 4th. So we celebrate 4th of July as our Independence Day, even though it's not actually the day that we voted to break away. So what is the Declaration made of? What's it look like? Well, there's really two main parts to it. The first part's called the preamble. And this is just the opening paragraph, right? Pre means before, so it's at the beginning. And the preamble lists the basic beliefs of the colonists. And it says everybody has natural rights like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, you can see right there, that's almost word for word what John Locke said. He said life, liberty, and property. But Jefferson tweaked it a little bit and said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The preamble says government gets its power from the people. And it says if government fails to protect the people's rights, the people can get rid of the government. So there's John Locke's social contract theory. So you can see John Locke played an important role in what goes into our Declaration of Independence. The second part of the Declaration is actually just a list of complaints. It's a list of reasons why the colonists decide to break away from Great Britain. For example, we wrote in there that Britain broke up the colonial legislatures. They didn't allow us to govern ourselves. They kept the army here against the wish of the colonists. Right? We didn't want the army here, but the king and parliament kept the army here. They put taxes on us without our consent. And they are waging war on us. So these aren't the only complaints, they're just some of the major ones. He said, look, here's why we're breaking away. So that gives you a little bit more of an understanding of kind of the build up to the Declaration, what the two sides were, patriots and loyalists, and what they were arguing. It tells you about that middle group, the moderates, and it lets you know what's actually in the Declaration of Independence.